Worm is a web serial by J.C. McCrae, also known as Wildbow. You can read Worm in its original format by visiting parahumans.wordpress.com or donate to Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow. This story isn't intended for young or sensitive readers. Readers who are on the lookout for trigger warnings are advised to give Worm a pass. For a complete list, check the description for all of Worm's trigger warnings.
Welcome back to Dissecting Worm.
Yeah.
Myself, Jacob, joined by Allan, as always.
Hello.
And Michael.
Yeah.
Making us sound good.
Here we are.
How you fellas doing?
Good, Jacob. Good. Are we supposed to? Are we supposed to say "take that, you worms"? Or I forgot how this.
I thought we
works.
finished with that.
We gotta put that at the end.
Okay,
we honestly can say it whenever you want. Take that, you worms.
Take that.
Sometimes I just throw that out there.
And welcome to Dissecting Worm. You worms.
There we go. It's a work in progress. We'll figure it out by the end of the whole podcast. We'll have a good saying.
That's really the point of the podcast, is to figure out
a
good catchphrase.
Yeah. How to market ourselves.
And then we've BS'd the rest of this.
Yeah.
Just to get to that point.
We are in Arc 17, which is crazy.
Ooh,
we are
the back half, the back nine,
the back nine of this serial. A fun arc, a full interlude arc.
I got a lot of thoughts about this arc on its own, and so few notes about how to rewrite it.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's funny. There's, I don't want to say this is going to be a shorter episode because we got plenty to talk about. But in terms of this arc specifically and how it would adapt, it would adapt very well. There's not a lot to change, if anything. It's mostly just placing and maybe some minor tweaks. But overall, it's like a 1-1 adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned before, I was like, let's maybe we break it up and spread it out throughout the season. You were like, no, I think we just have it as its own episode. And you know what? You're right. I read this and I was like, I think this just goes. This is its own episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big issue is just where the heck do you put this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where we'll talk most for tonight, is sort of structuring season 3, which we've already talked about the issues with that and how to rearrange things, and then where this episode would fall. But no, this it feels very much like one of those bottle episodes, the wrong term, but sort of those standalone episodes in a series that focuses on a minor character. In recent television, the one that comes to mind is the episode of The Last of Us following what's his name, Bill. And drawing a blank.
Not Ted.
Yeah,
but yeah, I know. Episode 3.
On the two guys, and that episode is separate pretty much from the rest of the series, but works very well. Everybody loves it. For many people, it's their favorite episode. It's just, it kind of has that same feel to me. Yeah,
I like it.
Where it worked well splitting up because we talked about, and we were like, we could split it up. And we talked about the assault and battery interlude, but the advantage that interlude had was it had jumps in time within the interlude, so it had these really natural sort of splitting points, and this arc doesn't have that. It kind of just flows. So
at least not until the end.
Right, there's the one at the end. Yeah.
I would think there's like, I don't know, what is it like? Yeah, I guess it is just one. Shoot. Yeah. There's one at the end, and I know later on we'll get. I'm pretty sure we get an interlude. I'm pretty sure from for like Cody,
We do.
or like what happened to him, and so I think maybe having, like, maybe if you want to throw in like what happened to him earlier.
Yeah, that's true. We could maybe tie that in now.
Like specifically Trickster fucking him over somehow, just have that earlier.
Yeah, that's something we can revisit and by we I mean when I remind myself more of Cody's story.
Yeah, because it also made me think, like, okay, just in Farsight, do we even want to reintroduce Cody later on? Because I think that's like, I don't care. I really don't.
I was trying to remember how big of an impact on the story he has.
In
later.
terms of like in the universe, it's a weirdly big impact for something that I don't think really deserves to like be there.
Remind me, it's a spoiler podcast. Remind me.
Yeah, it's a spoiler podcast. He gets basically tortured and sold off to the Yongbon, the Chinese superhero
team. I remember that.
And he breaks away from his group and then kills or attempts to kill everybody in the like command headquarters during the Behemoth fight. And it's like attacking like Chevalier and all that.
Right.
And he gets, if I remember right, he gets a few people. Obviously not Chevalier and others. And I think, yeah. But it's just like a weirdly like, oh, like all of a sudden we're back at Cody and he's like, yeah, man, I'm really pissed off and a lot of brainwashing and other stuff and I'm going crazy and now I just attack all the people in here. Like, okay, like, man, that was weird. Like, in my mind, you shipped his ass off and I am okay never seeing him again. Like, I don't really feel like he adds to the story.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'd have to reread that part again, but that sounds like one of those scenes where in a television adaptation, you would replace him with another relevant member of some group at that point.
I just think you don't have the whole Yongbon, like him, whoever character breaking off and attacking the headquarters thing. Like Behemoth's enough of an issue on its own. Like we don't have to have. And unless the point, and granted, it's been a while. Maybe the point of him breaking off is that much like the Simurgh, it's a demonstration of the Simurgh's power.
Right.
Are we talking about
fine
perdition?
But I think what?
Are we talking about Cody?
Yes,
as in
perdition.
Perdition. Okay.
Yeah, as in perdition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're certainly obviously going to revisit that.
But I think you could basically replace that. And granted, that's better at showing like, yes, the Simurgh plays the long game, which is fine. But I think you just go, okay, like, man, all of this Noel business, it's almost as if they've, lucked out and got away because the Simurgh, like, allowed it or, planned it. You could just chalk that up to like, oh, they were exposed to the Simurgh. That's kind of why they're way crazier than they probably should have been. Stuff like that.
Yeah. The only thing to interject, which probably may not matter that much, but he gets kicked out of the Travelers because he like touches Noel 3 times and makes 3 clones of himself.
Yes. I don't know. He gets kicked out, but they never show how in that chapter.
Right. Spoilers, obviously. But if we kick out his character completely, are we going to have someone else who does that, or does that matter? Because I don't
think we kick out the character completely. I think we just like when it's time to like, give him to Coil. Like Coil wants somebody to answer for it. Trickster just does a little trickeration and shoves him into a box or something like that.
Okay.
That, some way that his looping power doesn't get him in there. Like,
Mhm.
like even if he can rewind 3 to 5 seconds, he's already been in, the transparent box the whole time and he didn't realize Mission Impossible style. So he can rewind 3 to 5 seconds, but he's still in the goddamn box. So
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
something
just
like
talking
that.
about just ending Cody's story within the episode, essentially.
Yeah, or Trickster fucking kills him and just goes, like I never liked you. I wish I could say this was tough for me, but this is the easiest. This is the easiest decision I've ever made, and then just
Right.
shoots him.
Right.
Just does a little Trickster moment where he replaces a part of Cody's brain matter with a bullet, and doesn't even need to use his power.
Oh my
He doesn't even
gosh.
need to use his power. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think that makes sense. I'll obviously probably want to reread the whole Cody arc, make sure we're not missing anything. But yeah, obviously, if he has such a minor role later on, then that's just on the chopping block. Unfortunately, like cool power, I like all that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about already an overload of characters, you gotta start cutting out those small scenes that don't add anything.
I think he serves a great purpose in this arc.
Yeah.
And nowhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But that aside, I don't know of too many other changes to the story.
I'm looking through. I have one note all the way at the end. Great intro to Accord, who we will be dealing with later.
Yes.
And maybe adding Damsel in there. Here's why I say that. I know, big spoiler for some people, but Damsel is a character that shows up in Ward. So, and a relatively important one. So, given that, I think there should be a little bit of extra attention paid to Damsel. Even if it's just we've mentioned her once, that she got picked up, I want to say by the Slaughterhouse 9 during one of the interlude chapters with Dragon and Defiant. She gets picked up by the Slaughterhouse 9 to, pad their roster. We could have an introduction, just another name dropped here. I think, the fight against her probably during the Slaughterhouse 9000 arc. Just having her be a little bit more just mentioned every now and then, so that when we get to it's like, oh yeah, she's been mentioned before, we've talked about her, we've shown her. Like,
so here, let's do this because I don't think we disagree enough, you and I, on this podcast, and it's probably good to play some devil's advocate here and there. I disagree with that for a couple reasons.
okay.
One, Ward is a different story. Yes, it's a sequel, but nothing in Ward has an impact on Worm. It's only the other way around.
Yes.
So the only time we'd want to entertain anything that has to do with Ward is if the plan from the beginning is to adapt Ward. And
yes.
we're not. So it's hard for me to justify decisions yet. It's fair. It's fair.
And I'm not asking for more. I'm not asking for more, like more than is already kind of within the bounds of the story. So in this case, Accord is talking about Brockton Bay. They're post Boston. So they're post Boston games. We're dealing with Blasto. There could just be mention, hey, Damsel's also here somehow. Like,
I mean, if you want to keep it to a mention a la an MCU, like in the scene in Civil War before the Doctor Strange film is announced, and what's his name, the one little nerdy rat is being ratted out. He's like, we've got eyes all over the place, Tony Stark, Stephen Strange, we've got eyes on everybody. And this was like 4 years for the, sure, if you want to keep it to like a mention like that, so that there's like a clever name drop for fans, and then down the line Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah,
This is
literally
more,
that. And when they fight in the Slaughterhouse 9000, maybe she gets more attention paid than Spawner or whatever the other, like, just
Mhm.
a little bit more like, oh, there she is. We know what she looks like, at least,
Mhm.
generally speaking. Because I don't think she actually gets, if I remember right, she gets like almost no attention in this story, despite being part of the Slaughterhouse 9000 thing, because there were so
Mhm.
many ex uh X 9000 people they cloned and brought out and combined in weird
Right.
ways. So,
Yeah.
um,
No, my larger issue is I don't want the thought of, and this isn't really so much applicable here, but I don't want to constrain any of our changes we make for Worm because of the implications it may have for Ward. So I wouldn't want to impact our adaptation of Worm negatively, just in order to preserve something in a different story, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, that makes sense. I'm proposing that we just do something that's already existing, and it is just literally taking a word and putting it in bold instead of leaving it, you
Hmm.
know, just there.
Yeah. No, and I think that's fine. This is more broad strokes here,
Yeah, yeah. Um,
especially just because Worm is bloated as it is, and we already have trouble cutting characters because we love them all so
yeah,
much. So
I
it's
yeah.
hard to sort of trim down. You
Something I
know.
was thinking about, and why I like Ward. Uh, it is a difference between Ward and Worm, as long as we're on this topic. And it will have to do with the arcs, so I will bring this in. But Ward has in each of his stories, there is very in Wild Bow stories, there are very few times that you get to rest and enjoy time with the characters without there being conflict or just outright,
Mhm.
physical violent conflict. Like, and Ward, feels like the first time. I mean, he did a better job in Twig, which was his third one, of some, but Ward was the first one where it really did feel like, here's us doing something for an arc, here's us resting for an arc. And like literally, going out shopping
Mhm.
and living life.
Mhm.
And I enjoyed that so much because like living the day to day works in a really long form serial. Uh, it may not be exciting. It's not what draws you in and goes, oh, let me really turn to the next page to see what tops they bought. Like, but in terms of consistency of, you're putting out this, so many times a week. I enjoy reading that and getting time to breathe and enjoy that downtime with the characters.
Mhm.
And Worm does not have that
No.
really at all. Like we got some of it, and occasionally they'll throw in a chapter, but then like, the barbecue gets interrupted. Or in this case, the characters don't even get to play their video game because they get everything interrupted all at once. And
Mhm.
um, I appreciate seeing them interact, figure out this friend dynamic where they're like, we've got to vote this person off the team, basically. Like, and that is a little more conflict based, but I enjoy looking at the mundane in a supernatural world.
Mhm.
Um, and might be just that is just personal preference. Um, of course, what Worm does, I think, better than so far all of Wild Bow's other works is Worm. It has s- uh, 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 a story plot that is like, I think, very well done and apparent, and has like even if you can't see the ending, like there is a trajectory to it, as opposed to his other works, which is like Pact is the equivalent of shit rolling downhill, and picking up speed. And Twig is a meandering path to something that you were like, oh, that's what we're going for. Okay, like I mean, sure, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And even Ward, as much as I love Ward, has, you know, it's odd, but you know, a Worm is the best one. That just the problem it is that it feels. You said bloated. I think it feels rushed.
Mm-hmm.
For the amount of stuff that is packed in there. In terms of reading, that's great. But you know, and you know, the amount that he is able to fit in there is dense. You know, it's lots of characters, lots of world building, lots of this, lots of that. But it doesn't allow time to breathe in the world that he's created, which can sometimes be good because then you don't have to explain stuff. And he is good at explaining, but like it gives you enough time to like sit there, say it, and then like move on. Like we've explained this, we can move past this, and not have characters interact with it enough to break it, or to bring things into questions by interacting with it. And I think all of that to say, you know, as we're moving through arcs, like that lack of downtime really irritates me. And I think having this constant upkeep of just moving to the next combat, you know, just moving to the next, oh, we got to do this, we got to do that, is really rough on viewers. And people talk about A plots and B plots to break tension, but the problem is if everything that's happening is tense all at the same time, like you don't get a break. And I think the viewers need a break in a lot of these seasons. And I no idea where that's going to happen in this one.
I think we've been subtly throwing that in, even though we haven't been focusing on it a lot. But we've talked about how in season 2, for example, we need a really strong B plot of the wards doing detective work. You know, mostly by
that is true. I do like the wards and then the Amy's family, the Dallin family.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing with you don't have to necessarily cut or break tension to just slow the pace down. You can just switch to a different plot line that's still moving forward. You know, you don't have to have a slice of life episode or scene, you know, every now and then. Those are nice, don't get me wrong. But like you don't have to do that. I see what you're saying. But you can achieve that, you know, with switching between your plot points or your plot lines. You know, just making sure that the show. This just all comes down to pacing, making sure the show is well paced.
No, and I get that you can do that with plot lines, but it does feel like almost all the characters are on their toes all the time because of the events that are happening, and so giving more breathing room through arcs or through interludes and stuff, I think is a smart idea. I think this arc, as we adapt it to an episode, stays generally the same. However, the breathing room comes from the later time jump, kind of. You get a breathing room as they finally, get it out, and they're traveling, and then they're at, dealing with a cord and all that. Like the openers to those takes the tension off because you're in a new setting. You're not having to deal with whatever that conflict was at the time. You're spending the time figuring out what this new one is, basically. So there's a little breathing room at the end, but I think this episode, for its purpose, like needs to have that lots of pressure, because that's literally what the Simurg is doing. So I think
Worm is unique because the lack of breathing room for Worm specifically feels really what's the word I'm thinking of, intentional, because of the underlying conflict that the entities are focused on, right? Is kind of creating conflict and sowing all of that uncertainty, and all of that plays into Worm as a story. So you almost would expect, after the fact, looking back on it, less, periods of calm, the downtime, that kind of stuff doesn't fit naturally into the story anyway. So it's hard to put that in.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if we had a little bit more managing team dynamics and the Undersiders, even with their their territories, um, managing the territory with Taylor, her relationship with her dad. I think those are all easy things where you could be having conversations, sit down, just going to do something that, well, still has tense moments. So, discussions and uh, situations that they're in. But I think it could have had those if, if this conflict does really well as a seller, because you can always have the cliffhanger. And it's hard to have those quiet moments when you're trying to have every chapter be a cliffhanger. Balbo's really good at that. That's really good for serials. And once he has established himself, you can get to stuff like Ward, where not every chapter needs to be exciting and have a cliffhanger, because all those people, like your audience is already pre-built. Like all those people are gonna gonna watch the next episode. Read the next chapter.
Right.
Because you're committed. Like and he'd been writing for 6 years at that point.
Right.
So
yeah, no, I mean, I think you're saying a lot of those are great ideas. In terms of keeping audiences engaged, I think that's really important. It just all comes down to how you're going to pace the show. And again, we're thinking long term. We're thinking probably 4 to 5 seasons minimum. This
6 seasons in a movie.
6 seasons in a movie, right? Like you can pull examples from other shows that do it poorly or don't do it well or do it great. So it's kind of just it's probably the most challenging aspect of adapting a story or writing a story in the first place is pacing it effectively so that the audience is engaged the entire time. It's not too jarring. You've got a good balance of action, of character building, of relationships, and all this kind of stuff. So that is the struggle. So
and if this was a set of movies, we were adapting it for movies, I think you would be fine, just full bore, nonstop. I would actually suggest cutting out a lot of the quieter moments, because these are essentially superhero action movies. We want they start a little bit quiet, or maybe they start with a fight and then get quiet, and then you just continue to rising action, just continuously fight, and then you're done. End movie. You just assume there's been the rest period is the time you leave the theater and wait for the next movie to come out. That's when you get to rest. Otherwise, in an action movie, you don't get to pause.
Yeah.
So if this were movies, I'd have very different feelings about this. I would think that the rushing through everything is appropriate and great for it. But as a TV show, I think it needs breaks.
Yeah, and again, I do think a lot of those breaks will come from our B and C plots. I think
the spread out interludes and stuff.
Exactly. We've got our cold opens. All of season 2 is going to have our assault and battery moments. Those are pretty not as stressful as the other moments. So I think we're actually putting in more of those than we think we might be too. We haven't even talked about all of the cauldron, which is probably more of a C-D plot at this point. But any sort of those conversations, the fault line. I am really struggling with names today. My goodness. Anyway, but you got fault lines crew, and all of that's a bit of a mystery element, which is a bit slower paced in general. So I think naturally, as you break down scenes and space out episodes, my feeling is that a lot of those moments might fall into place kind of naturally. That would be that would be the ideal, is that those moments are already there. They just sort of fall into place as you set everything.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it's
We'll see.
a tricky balance.
We interrupt our scheduled program to bring you a word from our sponsor, Zencastr, a one-stop shop for all your podcasting needs. When we first started this podcast, we knew we needed a service that would let us record remotely. After doing some research, Zencastr was the obvious choice. We started using Zencastr and never looked back. It's super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. All you do is log in, invite people to join your room, and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. You can record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. You can rest easy even if you have an unstable connection, knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality. We do all our recording in Zencastr, and when the episode is ready, we can distribute it to all major podcast platforms. Zencastr has made podcasting so much easier with its all-in-one podcasting platform and tools. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code Brocktonbaybc, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. That's zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Brocktonbaybc. And now back to our scheduled programming.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's always helpful at the end of one of our pretend seasons when we do like a recap to kind of get a good perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, we can kind of start doing that. We are like kind of the midway point of this season. And I don't really have notes for this episode just because I think it works as is. Do we just want to talk trajectory? Like,
Yeah, I think
this is such a
so.
weird season.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about the struggles of like, we both really don't like the idea of killing Coil in the second episode of season 3, or third episode, right? Like it feels too important. He's been too big of a deal throughout the story. It feels like a season finale or penultimate episode of the season, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Towards the end.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel right. I don't know. Hey, let us know if we're wrong. Come at us. Give us a call.
Yeah.
Love to hear it. But of course, with that comes a bit of needing rearranging to be done, because if you're going to do that, then we can't really leave all of Noel until after that. So yeah, we get kind of an issue.
So I have an idea with that, because we've talked about we'd like to not end Coil now, but we don't want to. He is sort of this big bad. Obviously not as big and as bad as Noel, but potentially keeping him around in some fashion, and then deal with him, kill him later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way to still get the win and like basically destroy Noel, or get Noel to break and break out and everything, is Coil basically assuming that he's about to die enacts the Noel plan as his last maneuver, and confesses in front of Taylor and Tattletale that he was never going to be able to help Noel. He tried, but they thwarted the plans, and there's no way that she'll ever be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And he says this, full well knowing that he's got a cell phone on and that they can hear everything. And Tattletale is basically confirming you dragged me into this, you made me lie to her. So Noel is still hearing all this, still gets super pissed, and is going after the Undersiders. And the way that it's phrased, I think it would just clever of Coil, as he's using his powers to obfuscate the truth, when it comes to Tattletale's power, so she can't detect it. The way he says it essentially implies that the Undersiders, through Tattletale, maybe were supposed to do this. Were supposed to help out and have ruined everything.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's through capturing him and dismantling his leadership, or just it was Tattletale's fault and Taylor's fault for like lying to her somehow.
Mm-hmm.
She goes crazy. They lock him up in Dinah's old room because you fuck Coil, and then free Dinah. I still think you get that moment where she gets to see. Here's mm,
I like it so far.
I think that potentially Taylor keeping Dinah around for two reasons. Number one, she realizes that Dinah's incredibly useful in fighting this S-class threat. And two, she can have these moments where she is talking to Dinah and basically acting like Coil, which I think is the whole reason we keep like Coil around. And then on the flip side, maybe like asking, like occasionally talking to Coil and him pointing out more or less that she's the same as him. Like, you're literally doing the same things that I would have done. And Taylor being like, fuck you, I'm nothing like you, you're not my real dad. At which point we go kind of through the whole Noelle arc. And we get at the end of beating Noelle and all of this, Coil says, so like, what are you going to do? Like, you're a bad enough person that you've already kept Dinah around for this whole time. Like, she could have gone home. I mean, granted, the Noelle fight, I think, gets wrapped up in like, we'll say 2 days. You know, I forget exactly the time frame, but pretty quickly. But, you know, you've already held on to this girl when she could have gone home, you know, anytime this week, and you've held on to her just like I did. Like, why not go ahead and keep her? And she's like, I'm nothing like you. Eventually, she just kills him, like just shoots him in the cage, cold-blooded, which just goes to show that, you know, she is very monstrous. And then at the end of the season, she walks Dinah home and is like, I'm never doing this. Like, I can't, like, I'm a terrible person. And she's like just flooded with guilt and regret for keeping Dinah there, for killing Coil kind of in cold blood. And I think that leads perfectly into the next season, in which, you know, you could have Dinah literally as she ends the season hand her 2 notes. And then Taylor having to come to terms with all of that in the next season, in which she begins her turn because she's like, oh my God, I am that terrible. And I don't want to be.
Yeah, I think I like most of that. I probably wouldn't change. I mean, obviously you've got to keep Coil alive initially after that capture. I think you just lock him up. I think they just choose not to kill him at that point. Just lock him up.
Like I said, he just goes in the Dinah closet.
Yeah, I wouldn't I really like the visual of how he's killed later. And so I wouldn't want to change that too much. And I don't think you have to. I think you can keep a lot of that the same. It's just they deal with him after they deal with Noelle, and he just maybe stages a breakout or something like that. He's smart. He breaks free, and they catch him again. You know, whatever. You can work it however you want, and still kind of get to your same ending. I like the idea. We've talked before about having both Taylor and Lisa kill him, and I really like that. I probably wouldn't want to change that.
I like that a lot too.
I do like the idea of Taylor flirting with keeping Dinah around. She mentions it in the serial. Dinah kind of mentions that, and Taylor's like, oh, she'd be pretty useful.
Doesn't she say it's like a 50% chance that she keeps her?
Yeah.
I mean, which in all honesty, what if this is the other 50%, you know?
Right. Yeah, I'd want to tone it down a little bit just because I really love. I don't want to tamper too much with Taylor's slow build towards self-destruction because it's paced so well in the story. In my opinion, I think her rise and fall is really, really well paced, and I don't think we need to rush any of that because, I mean, killing Coil is close to enough. I mean, it's the first life she's ever intentionally taken. Like that's a big moment for her as a character already. So I think that that moment is enough for her as a character to already have her be like, am I doing the right thing? Have her start doubting everything. I mean, I think she could still absolutely be like, Frodo in the ring or Sam and, give me the ring, Sam. And Samwise says, oh, I don't know. It's a pretty cool ring. That's a movie thing that didn't happen in the books, but anyway, nerd section over. But I think she can kind of play with that for a minute, but I wouldn't want to go too far down that road, only because I don't want to diminish later moments in the story where she has similar moments. But I think everything else there, I think just locking Coil up for the time being, him releasing Noelle. I like your idea of him because the issue we run into is, of course, that Noelle's pissed at the Undersiders because she thinks that their killing of Coil is going to stop her from getting fixed because she's convinced that Coil can fix her. So if we're going to keep Coil alive for this point, then he's got to throw the Undersiders under the bus at this point so that Noelle's still mad at them. So I think you're right there. And there's a few ways you could do that. Of course, it's kind of just how you want to word that bit of deception. And then obviously once Noelle's too far gone, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. And then of course we get back to this episode or Arc 17 and this episode for Arc 17 and where to place that. That gets tricky too. I don't know where I'd want to place it. I think it could work in a few places. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
I mean, my thought is, I mean, I think they catch up with Coil, like you have it as is, catch up with Coil. He does this little confession thing where he's like, yeah, like I was all on board. Let's help Noelle. And I asked Tattletale, and Tattletale's like, there's no helping that bitch. And she didn't say anything, thus just completely ignoring the fact of like, well, yeah, but you also could have said like, we can't help you, but just because he's, gets away with that shit like he does, just says, and Tattletale never told you. Unbelievable. Like, man, can't believe she'd do that. And then, moving on from there, where they find her the place, she's broken out, like they're dragging him back and they throw him in the cell. Like, what the hell did you do? And they get back there and he's like, man, what does a girl with no hope do? Like, may God have mercy on your souls.
I mean, and if you want to do it that way, you can keep the episode almost where it's placed.
That's what I'm saying. It's like you have that and then just same spot.
Yeah. And then just instead of the end of, cutting back to Coil's death, you just have it cut back to Noelle's empty cage or something like that.
Yeah.
And you've done the same thing. Yeah. I mean, that's honestly probably the easiest place to put it. That would make the most sense.
I like it.
Yeah. I was going to say you could put it at the end too, but that gets a little tricky. Yeah, I'd probably do that. I think that works well. I think it works as a nice because also this would split the season into, the first couple episodes deal with Coil and all of that and taking him down. They've got him, and then you get this episode sort of resets everything, and then after this is everything dealing with Noelle, and then you get through that, and then you wrap up the season with Coil again.
Yeah. Yeah, because they deal with Noel, and then you just transfer. Like I said, I think keeping Dinah around to assist with this, and I think just racking that up on Taylor using people. Oh man, I'd really like to take you home, but we don't know if you're gonna if she'll attack you because she knows you're sent and you were nearby. Like all these justifications, which could absolutely be true.
Mm-hmm.
She says like, well, if anybody could figure out the percentages of helping her, like, and even though there's basically a 0% chance of helping her, which she might have even asked Dinah, like, she still won't take that as an answer. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a very good chance that even Noel could be like, I'm going to kill you and your little pretty precog too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then, finally turns her in. And that's the happy season ending for me is Taylor limping home after all this stupid stuff, delivering Dinah to her house and then walking away.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's literally how you end the season is that, the thank me, don't, thank you, don't thank me.
Mm-hmm.
This is all my fault.
Yeah, I do like that. I do like ending the season with her bringing Dinah back home. I think that works very well.
Because because I would say this is another thing that I just don't, and I get that there's sort of a vibe in here for like no good deed goes unpunished, and but in terms of if you're writing this for a book, for instance, I don't think you have any of the like weirder, happier like success moments in the middle like you would in a lot of these. There's some other moments I'm trying to remember off the top of my head that kind of upset me that like, oh yay, this victory is in the middle of an arc. And I get that that's just flow of time chronologically. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But flow of narrative, as something that is fictional and created and the flow of events is controlled, you put that at the end. And it feels a lot better because you get to have that. And then you close the book and take a deep, satisfied breath that it was with everything else about that chapter sucked, but we got the little girl home, which was the goal. And the next, arc can suck all the way too. But if you were reading this book to book, we'll say, instead of, half week to half week, her dropping off her mid book would just be weird.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly. Assuming that the end of the book ends, I see what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, you want it to be, you want those beats to make sense when they hit, especially for something like this, which even though we've toned down the significance that Dinah has on Taylor's story, is still an aspect of her story. So you still want to make sure that all lands smoothly,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so that makes
also
sense.
would one thing. Oh, it's shoot, it's not in here, but it's something we'll talk about next time that I will make an addendum to, which is we talked about having the travelers be the ones that abducted Dinah in the first place.
Right, we talked about that a while ago.
And since I may have read ahead to arc 18, which I have a lot more notes on, just to pad time on this one, they undetermined whether or not they were recruited right after the bank heist in arc 3, like immediately following Dinah's capture, they were grabbed, or if they were brought in without knowing that Dinah hadn't been captured yet, but Coil was like basically like, I'll capture her. I'll say that I've already got the precog. Um, and we'll get them on board, and then I'll do that, and it'll be like, he was just bluffing about the time. Like, oh yeah, I totally have her already.
Yeah.
I don't have to go get her. I think we just say, in this case, we still have that scene of like, oh, Trickster swaps her out. And that's how they get her is they were like, yeah, that little girl right there knows how to fix Noelle. And that little girl, Taylor, later on, that little girl doesn't want you to have Dinah. That's a pretty simple buy right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be even another reason to keep Dinah around is, yeah, Noelle knows that Dinah, if you asked her the right questions, could probably figure out how to fix her.
Mm-hmm.
But Taylor doesn't want her to use Dinah. I'm sorry. Taylor doesn't want them to use Dinah. She wants to get Dinah home. But at the same time, Taylor is using Dinah to fight Noelle,
Right.
who wants to use her. So it's this weird, like, everybody wants Dinah, and, Taylor's the only one that's kind of lying about why.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think one
or
thing
I should say is less selfish than everybody else about it.
Right. We kind of glossed over this, but it also, I'll be honest, this is part of the problem of having fans, like hardcore fans like you and I, working on trying to adapt the story, is because we really don't think well in terms of like how to replace moments and characters and condense and all these kind of things, because we love all the characters. We like all the moments. We want everything to copy over. But it totally makes sense, as you were kind of talking there, that final scene in the arc where Trickster talks with the cord and has that whole thing. It makes way more sense to replace that scene with Trickster talking to Coil and being recruited by Coil at that point. And it makes way more sense at that point for Coil to end that with Coil being like, I've got an assignment for you to test everything, to test you guys out. It's a kidnapping. And it's where you just kind of cut it there. Like that makes it eliminates the need for a new face you've never met before, even though Accord does play a role later on. There's plenty of other places you can introduce him. Two, it better establishes the link between the Travelers and Coil, which I think is way more important here than just Accord being like, I have a contact that you might want to reach out to,
Yeah. Yeah. Also, like, Accord feels like just no wonder Cord and a Coil, like Accord and Coil are like
our buds.
are buds. Like,
Yeah.
Of course they are.
Right. Two perfectionists. Yeah. But yeah, I think that makes way more sense. I think implying heavily, especially if you don't show it earlier, that the Travelers, specifically Trickster, are the ones who kidnapped Dinah. All that kind of stuff can be made a lot more clear in this episode, in this interlude.
I like it.
Those are just some ramblings that we have there.
No, that's good.
This is day one in the writing room, folks. This is the giant whiteboard. We're in the line down the middle, and one side it says good ideas, and then the other side says there's no such thing as bad ideas, and there's just ideas listed on both. It's just one of those.
Yeah.
Throw it up, see what sticks, go from there.
I always love. I don't even remember what it's from, which is just all right, guys, come on there. Oh no. It's I think it's Bernie Burns doing like, all right, guys, there's no bad ideas. What about this? I just said no bad ideas. Why would you go ahead and say a bad idea immediately? Get out. Gosh. Anybody else
no
have
bad
anything?
ideas. Yeah.
I like it.
Exactly. No, I think that's one thing I've enjoyed reading all the comments and people giving us their thoughts and ideas. Obviously, we got a lot of people that strongly disagree. We love that. We expect it. But just understand, of course, that we haven't written any of this. This is all off the cuff. We're having a casual conversation.
Yeah. Disagree and give me a better alternative. And don't you dare say, just keep it the way it is. Because then, like, that defeats the exercise. Now, doesn't it?
I think I don't know if you said this on the podcast, Allan, or just we were chatting separately, where you were like, the truth is, Worm is any adaptation of Worm is going to suffer a bit, and it's just not going to be as good as the serialization. And it's like, welcome to any adaptation. How many adaptations have you watched where you're like, oh, the movie was way better than the book? Like,
Oh, hold on. I can think of a few.
I'm sure. Okay, I'm sure there's a couple. Actually, I think Stephen King has said he's liked a couple of the film adaptations better than his books, which is funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what I like for the
But
most part.
It's not often.
Yeah,
it certainly
for the most
is not
part,
often.
the book is the better story, which I think Worm fans would probably agree. So, this is fun. We're having a fun time.
It makes me wonder genuinely if drastically straying from the Worm series would be better than staying so close, but changing, events and timelines.
Oh, I mean, I've thought for a long time that I think I love Worm's story, but I think your best bet at adapting anything in Worm would be a full series on one of the background groups, right? A full series following Fault Line's crew, a full series following some unknown capes in a city we have barely touched on, the ambassadors or Saints crew, these small character groups that just because like Worm as a setting is so cool and is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's more interesting to me. And I think like you would have a much easier time adapting a new story in the world than trying to adapt the existing world, the existing story.
I already have an idea because I think for most of this, you run with the same timeline no matter what the story is. I mean, which was kind of the general idea. Is like Wild Bow, if I remember right, wrote this backwards. Like he had the ending, he plotted out, everything, and then just was like, pick a character, and that's who we're going to follow through it. But the timeline stays the same no matter which character you're following. Hence, like all the interludes and stuff.
Right.
The beauty of that is like, what if we did just pick the Fault Line team and then just operated like arc by arc, but like we could literally plot out, all right, here's the chronology. What are they doing during arc 1? What are they doing during arc 2? And, you could go chapter by chapter,
Right.
What are they doing? Even if it's in Las Vegas, what are they doing? And write a whole thing like that. And if you wanted to make the end Fault Line centric, I have a perfect idea. It's just you do the whole Khepri thing, except with, and granted, this would blow Ward out of possibility, basically, but you have the whole Khepri thing, except you have Labyrinth be the character at the very end that does a power thing. And instead of us driving the whole, like the Scion to madness thing, we essentially have Labyrinth unfold and introduce Eden, I think was
his partner.
Basically unfold Eden out using her power and reunite them. And instead of instead of it being like this weird thing where everybody has the stuff, they just take everybody's powers and leave. The original intention.
Right. Just Well,
and that's the end. That's the end of the series. It's just nobody has powers anymore.
I know it's one thing that makes Worm so great is that the only reason we're following Taylor is because of the end, because she's Khepri in the end. But like, you could replace her with any other character and they would immediately feel like the main character. This isn't like, we've talked about this before, but it's like you're watching Batman or you're Superman or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, obviously the character named Superman, who's stronger than everyone in the world, is going to be the main character of this story. But like Worm doesn't have that intrinsically. You're just following the protagonist because they're the protagonist. They're the ones that have at the end of the story are going to do the thing. So like that's why you're following them. It's such a natural feeling that can be replaced with anybody. So yeah, it's a great world. Great world. But we're diverting a bit. Getting back to 17, I think we've said all that I think I've said all that.
I'll be honest. Because there's so, as I ranted earlier about like, yeah, just don't say, just keep it the exact same, and then immediately go like, I really got nothing for this. Yeah, this is a short episode. We hit our hour mark, pretty good, and I think obviously next episodes I've already got more notes for those, but this one's such a straightforward narrative. I feel like
I think
doesn't really need to be adapted that much.
Yeah, I think focusing more on the season and structuring that makes more sense anyway right now, because as we get into the Noel fight and all of that, there's going to be some more work that needs to be done. So, I think we're done here. I think arc 17 is pretty cut and dry. Great characters, great arc. Be a lot of fun. This be a fun episode to see. I have very visual, and first live action episode you'd see with the Simurg and all that. So, be a fun one. Well, with that being said, Alan, thanks for joining me as always. Michael,
thank you, Jacob. Thanks for
sticking around. And thanks to everybody for listening. We really do appreciate all of the feedback, all of the comments, all of the critiques, everything like that. We really do. It's a whole lot of fun recording and interacting with Worm fans. We're all so passionate about the story. We all love it. And we hope you'll stick with us.
Also, of course, don't forget to reach out at 980-999-0438. Leave us a voicemail and you might get featured on our next episode.
Arc 18 is next. That's a fun one. Big, long arc, lots of interludes. I think another 4 interlude arc as well. So lots of other world building to talk about. That's going to be probably a longer episode. Yeah. Stick around for that one. It's going to be a blast. And until next time, as always, take that, you worms.
Thank you so much for listening. Read along with us at parahumans.wordpress.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you love? What did you hate? Anything you think we missed, etc., as long as it's kind. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find us on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit at Brocktonbaybc, or click the link in the description.